They used her illness against me, until the truth was revealed. If you're listening to this story, I'd ask only one thing of you before we go any further. Stay with it. Not because it's shocking, and not because it ends with triumph, but because it unfolds the way real family injustices do, slowly, quietly, and wrapped in the language of concern. Some stories don't reveal their meaning until you've heard every part of them, including the parts that feel ordinary. The moment everything began did not feel dramatic at all. It happened in a hospital corridor that smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee. My aunt sat in a wheelchair beside me, her hands folded neatly in her lap, listening as the doctor explained her diagnosis in calm, careful terms. It was serious, but manageable. There were treatment options. There was time. Before my aunt could ask her first question, my cousin stepped forward and thanked the doctor, already talking about schedules and follow-ups. I stood behind them, holding her coat, watching decisions form without her voice. No one asked me to take responsibility that day. No one needed to. On the drive home, my cousin mentioned casually that it would be easier if I handled most of the care. I lived closer. I didn't have children. My schedule was more flexible. The word reliable was used, the way people use it when they're handing something heavy to someone else. I nodded because it sounded reasonable, and because refusing would have required explaining something I didn't yet know how to articulate. At first I told myself it would be temporary. A few weeks while everyone adjusted. That's how these arrangements are always introduced. Temporary has a way of becoming permanent when no one else intends to step in. Within a month, I was attending every appointment, tracking medications, coordinating insurance calls, managing symptoms, and answering late-night phone calls when something felt wrong. When the phone rang, it rang for me. When something went smoothly, no one noticed. Family gatherings changed in small, almost invisible ways. Conversations softened when my aunt entered the room. Plans were adjusted without asking her opinion. She was spoken about far more than she was spoken to. When she tried to contribute, someone would gently remind her to rest, to avoid stress, to save her energy. Concern became a convenient way to silence her, and everyone seemed relieved when she stopped pushing back. As months passed, my role expanded while my authority remained non-existent. Decisions about her treatment were discussed elsewhere, then relayed to me as instructions. I was expected to enforce plans I hadn't helped create. When I asked why a medication was changed or an appointment cancelled, the answers were vague. The doctors agreed, "It's what's best. She doesn't need to worry about details. Trust us," they said. The phrase became a wall. I stayed quiet. Not because I agreed, but because I was watching. I noticed who attended appointments and who didn't. I noticed who spoke when finances were mentioned and who disappeared when responsibility came up. I noticed how quickly my aunt's illness was used to justify decisions that made life easier for everyone else. Silence made me useful. Silence made things efficient. They underestimated me because I didn't argue, and that underestimation gave me room to see clearly. The imbalance became harder to ignore in moments that should have been simple. One afternoon, my aunt told me she felt stronger than she had in weeks. She wanted to resume a small hobby she loved, something familiar that gave her comfort. When I mentioned it to the family, the response was immediate. Too tiring, too risky, better not to encourage her. I watched my aunt accept that answer without protest, and something in me shifted. Praise replaced help. I was thanked publicly for being devoted, dependable, selfless. None of that praise came with relief. Every thank you came with another expectation attached. If I looked tired, I was reminded that my aunt had it worse. If I hesitated, I was reminded of my moral duty. Guilt was applied carefully, consistently, until it felt like responsibility. Halfway through this story, if any of this feels familiar, I'd encourage you to keep listening. Not because it ends dramatically, but because it ends honestly, and honesty is rare in stories like these. The first crack appeared during what was supposed to be a routine checkup. A nurse reviewed my aunt's file and casually mentioned a treatment plan I had never heard of. When I said so, she paused and rechecked the screen. According to the notes, the plan had been discussed and declined weeks earlier. I felt no panic, only clarity. Something had been decided without transparency, and the paperwork knew it. I began requesting copies of medical records. Quietly, methodically, I organized timelines, compared notes, and read everything carefully. The discrepancies were subtle, which made them more troubling. Language that emphasized decline, notes that framed my aunt as less capable than she appeared, omissions that supported decisions already made. It wasn't fabrication, it was shaping. When I raised concerns, the response was immediate and defensive. Why now? Why create stress? Do you want to make this harder for her? Her illness was used as a shield, deflecting accountability while placing moral pressure squarely on me. If I persisted, I was selfish. If I stayed silent, I was loyal. I chose a third option. I kept collecting facts. I took the records to an independent specialist, someone with no connection to my family. I didn't dramatize anything. I asked simple questions. He reviewed everything carefully, then asked who held legal authority over medical decisions. I gave the answer I had always been given. He frowned and said the documentation didn't fully support it. Some authorizations were outdated. Others were never properly updated. The truth wasn't explosive. It settled quietly and heavily. Decisions had been made by people who no longer had the authority to make them. My aunt's illness had been used to centralize control while outsourcing care. I had been trusted with responsibility, but denied power. Others had claimed power without responsibility. The meeting where everything changed was calm. Papers were placed on the table. The specialist explained the implications. No one raised their voice. No one accused. There was nothing to argue with. Silence filled the room, thick and final. Oversight was reassigned. Decisions were paused. My aunt was asked questions directly for the first time in months. She answered carefully, thoughtfully, without the fragility everyone had assumed. Watching her reclaim her voice was not dramatic. It was dignified. After that, my role changed. The call slowed, then stopped. The praise disappeared. Without unquestioning compliance, there was less need for me. I stepped back without explanation. I didn't demand apologies. I didn't ask for understanding. My aunt's condition stabilized under care that respected both her health and her autonomy. She thanked me once, quietly, not for fixing anything, but for listening. That was enough. What I learned stays with me. Responsibility without authority is not trust. Concern without transparency is not care. Silence, when chosen deliberately, is not weakness, it is preparation. And if stories like this matter to you, if you've lived something similar, or watched it happen quietly in your own family, this channel exists for a reason. Some truths only lose their power once they're finally spoken calmly, clearly, and without apology.